The year was 536 AD, and the sun barely rose above a heavy gray sky. A thin, pale haze hovered weakly, letting just enough light seep through the gloom. Mist curled over frozen fields, and frost sparkled delicately on every rooftop. The villages lay quiet, almost holding their breath, as a soft wind sighed through empty streets. Even the birds seemed reluctant to wake, their wings folded tightly as if waiting for a gentler dawn. From chimneys, slender trails of smoke spiraled upward, slow and uncertain, carrying faint scents of straw and ash into the cold air. Inside a small dwelling, a child stirred beneath thick blankets, fingers flushed red from the biting chill. Pots clinked softly as they were lifted over struggling fires, their flickering warmth barely holding the cold at bay. The nearby river lay coated in frost, its surface gleaming yet still, masking the subtle currents moving beneath. Each careful step across the icy ground whispered a quiet warning, a rhythm marking a day that began in patient, gentle endurance. In this dim and unfamiliar world, life quietly carried on, fragile yet determined. Though the villages were hushed, they were far from empty. Footsteps cracked over frost-hardened dirt paths, cloaks drawn firmly around shivering bodies. Hands, red and stiff with cold, rubbed together near tiny hearth fires, coaxing glow from embers and ash. A pot tilted just so, catching the faintest light from within. Doors creaked open slowly under the weight of frost, revealing shadowed interiors where families moved with careful purpose, readying themselves for the day ahead with tender attention. Life unfolded in steady repetition. Smoke curled in slow spirals from chimneys scattered across the village. Hearth fires burned low but constant, casting warm, orange light over worn timber and straw-strewn floors. A child whispered softly beneath a shifting blanket. A hand gently adjusted a pot. The quiet world persisted, moving in deliberate, steady rhythm. Even beneath the dim skies, the smallest routines brought warmth. Every subtle gesture, the stirring of a pot, the shifting of a blanket, the patient tending of a fire, wove a steady rhythm that comforted the mind and soothed the body. Frost-bitten fingers brushed against dry straw. Breath mingled with smoke and the chill air. These repeated acts anchored the villagers' days in softness, granting them the quiet resilience to endure through the unusual darkness gripping the land. Step closer into this daily life and observe the small measures of survival. Villagers moved with calm purpose, never rushing. Each motion carefully balanced between caution and familiarity. Eyes tracked the fading trails of smoke. Hands pressed against warm hearthstones. Bodies adjusted to the biting frost and lingering shadows. Though the sun remained pale and the rivers frozen, these simple, continual acts, the gentle stirring of pots, the careful tending of embers, the thoughtful layering of clothes, kept the days moving forward, tethering hearts to the faint comforts that lingered amid 536's strange twilight. Within homes, villagers stirred beneath pale, gray light filtering through frost-covered windows. The morning awakened slowly, each movement deliberate and measured, as if the cold demanded a cautious negotiation. Hands rubbed against thick wool sleeves, chasing away numbness, while the persistent chill pressed against every doorway and window pane, reminding each person to move gently, avoiding sudden strain or rush. This was life then, quiet, deliberate, fragile, a careful dance with the cold and darkness that defined the year 536. In the chilly confines of the humble hut, layers of tunics and cloaks were pulled tight against the biting cold. Fingers fumbled awkwardly with clasps, stiffened by frost. striving to fasten each garment just so. Children nestled beneath blankets, small bodies curling intimately, drawing heat from bundled straw and the gentle breath of those nearby. The air was thick with the mingled scents of smoke and damp wood, wafting softly over frozen floors and threadbare straw mats. This faint aroma was more than comfort. It was a quiet testament that the hearth still held a glowing pulse of life. Outside, water was carefully drawn from the ice-laden well, the heavy buckets carried with measured steps that navigated slippery frost-coated paths. Each time the vessel was lifted and carefully tilted to pour its contents into simmering pots, there was an acute awareness of the chill eager to claim every exposed hand. In the pot, barley and root vegetables released wisps of gentle steam, their earthy fragrance blending seamlessly with that of moss and straw filling the air. Every stirring of this pottage, every deliberate ladleful of water added, transformed these ordinary tasks into a quiet ritual of survival, a comforting cadence marking the passage of the day and easing the body's weariness. Life in the hut carried on through these simple, repetitive routines. Dressing, fetching water, stirring the stew, adjusting blankets, tending small fires. Each movement held a purposeful steadiness that preserved order amid the stark, unforgiving cold outside. This repetition, though subtle, offered its own solace, reinforcing the steady rhythm of the household and the unspoken assurance that these small, deliberate acts could stitch the day together into something solid and enduring. Each motion drew a gentle rhythm into mind and body alike, coaxing the senses into calm attention. Even the creak of worn floorboards and the soft hiss of crackling firewood seemed to bend to this steady tempo, blending seamlessly into the daily flow around them. Soon, focus shifted naturally to the next essential duties, preparing firewood and securing the home's warmth. Hands reached for bundles of sticks, arranging them carefully near the hearth, checking that walls and doors remained stout against the lingering cold. Every move was slow and intentional, grounding and necessary, ensuring both safety and warmth, all while reinforcing the reassuring cadence of life in this modest, frost-laden shelter. As the first light of dawn crept through frost-speckled windows, families stirred quietly, moving with deliberate calm through the dim room. Small fires flickered weakly but persistently, pots lifted cautiously over the embers. Beyond, animals huddled together in pens, nudging close for mutual warmth. Each family member knew their role instinctively. Children fetched water from the partially thawed well. Older siblings tended fires. Adults stirred the hearty pottage or prepared simple breakfasts. Though the cold pressed relentlessly against doors and walls outside, within, the rhythm of familiar tasks fostered a comforting calm and sense of security. Gathering firewood was a slow, deliberate ritual. Hands pulled damp sticks free from the woodpile, removing frost and snow with careful shakes before stacking them neatly near the hearth. Every lifted stick, every placed bundle reinforced the household's ability to preserve warmth through the day ahead, quiet acts woven together in the fabric of daily life. Roofs were meticulously examined and repaired wherever needed, with layers of straw or moss expertly tucked into crevices to seal out drafts. Grain was carefully measured, divided, and stored with great care, each small action a deliberate step toward easing hunger over the coming hours. Nothing was rushed. Every movement bore purpose, a quiet ritual that transformed routine into a shield against uncertainty. Survival hinged on these seemingly minute, repeated tasks. Their repetition provided a steady rhythm, a reliable cadence that both body and mind could anchor themselves to. Each minor victory, the fire kept alive, the grain securely stored, the roof firmly sealed against frost, wove a fabric of reassurance and stability, empowering the villagers to confront the cold without succumbing. These small triumphs steadied both body and mind. With every task brought to completion, a subtle exhale swept through the household, a gentle release that eased the tension in the room. Confidence in their survival grew calm and measured. Though cold lingered, it no longer commanded fear. As morning advanced, the perspective broadened beyond the shelter of the hut. Frost-laden fields stretched outward, and neighboring villages echoed similar preparations, each tending to the same routines that bound them in a shared endurance and quiet cooperation. Although winter's grip remained firm, the village found a foothold of order and comfort in predictable, repeated actions, reinforcing a sense of security across the frozen expanse. Across Europe and Asia, a heavy sky weighed down on the land, darker than its natural state. Sunlight struggled feebly through a haze thick with volcanic dust, casting a dim, muted glow over fields and mountains alike. Crops succumbed silently to frost and cold, their yields unsure, colors dulled to pale shadows. Villages lay shrouded in fog, while smoke rose steadily from hearths, infusing the air with faint notes of straw and burnt wood. Once bustling roads meant for traders and neighbors now lay deserted and frost-coated, silent in the chill. Even remote lands felt the touch of cold and gloom carried on the wind, linking distant lives through subtle yet relentless hardships. Famine crept in quietly, seeping through towns and rural hamlets alike. Grain supplies grew thin as reserves dwindled, and the stubborn soil resisted growth beneath layers of frost and volcanic ash. Livestock suffered, starved of adequate fodder, and beaten by the persistent cold. Volcanic dust dimmed the skies, casting a ghostly pall over rivers and lakes, disrupting the natural rhythm of day and day. Night. Winds murmured cold chills across mountains and plains, slipping through half-empty streets and barren fields. The very air seemed burdened with a weight of quiet struggle, a persistent, gentle pressure resting upon every body and every home. Despite the overwhelming darkness blanketing the land, life endured quietly and stubbornly. In every village household, people held on to small bastions of comfort, coaxing a feeble fire back to life from cold embers, stirring the scant remains in their cooking pots, bundling children in thick layers of wool, and sharing the warmth of bodies huddled close together. Far beyond their village boundaries, in distant towns, neighbors still exchanged what little they had, scraps of food, whispered advice, or silent solace. Across the vast continent, communities responded in small, steady ways, proving that survival during such dark times was never a solitary endeavor. These modest comforts, though delicate, persisted like faint sparks within the widespread gloom. The gentle glow of a hearth fire, the simple act of sharing a meal, a worn but cozy cloak, or the quiet telling of a story softly carried the mind away from harsh reality. These human gestures created tiny sanctuaries of peace and reassurance, steadying the spirit when the world outside seemed relentlessly bleak. Turning back to focus on a single village, the vast shadow over Europe and Asia dissolved into intimate, daily life. Each village was its own small universe of care and action. The routine tasks repeated day after day. Feeding livestock, patching roofs, preparing meager meals, served as anchors, bridging the immense global darkness and the personal fight for survival. This gentle shift of attention from the immense to the familiar grounded the villagers' minds, balancing awareness of the season's impact with the comfort of well-known rhythms. In the muted light of dawn, villagers moved quietly, their voices low and careful as they exchanged whispers. Every movement was deliberate and slow, hands tying cords, straightening worn tools, tightening ropes, checking for drafts, and making sure each fire could burn steadily through the day. Even the smallest actions bore significance, performed with a tenderness, as if the biting cold demanded respect and care. They treated their tools with loving attention, oiling rusty hinges, binding handles worn thin with rough cord, sharpening blades dulled after weeks of little use. Pots were examined closely, roofs mended where frost had loosened the thatch, and their meager grain stores measured cautiously to last through uncertain days. These simple acts, repeated methodically, created a steady rhythm that anchored both body and mind amid the lingering gloom. Through these coping rituals, a subtle calm settled over the villagers. Each carefully executed motion, the stirring of pots, the rekindling of hearths, the tightening of door latches, brought a sense of reassurance. The regular cadence of their day imposed a predictable structure, offering quiet stability in an unstable world. Within this modest order, they found not grand relief or safety, but a measured control over their circumstances, a fragile, yet vital comfort in the face of uncertainty. Repetition brought a soothing comfort to the villagers. Though the daily chores were small and often laborious, they created a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Mind and body settled into this cadence, each gesture seamlessly leading to the next, gently shifting attention from one task to another. In this flow, worries and fatigue softened, replaced by a calm focus. With these rituals firmly in place, the household was prepared to enter the slow, intentional work of the day. The careful preparations, repaired tools ready for use, provisions neatly organized, the hearth tended and warm, enabled the villagers to flow naturally into their routine of survival. One motion blended into the next, bridging the vast cold darkness of winter, outside with the intimate, reassuring familiarity of their home and tasks. Morning light filtered softly through frost-laden windows as the villagers began their chores. Every movement was purposeful and measured. Caring for the animals, stirring thick pottage, checking the small fires that flickered stubbornly within cold hearths. Hands rubbed against thick woolen sleeves to stave off numbness. Fingers traced the contours of well-worn tools. The rhythm of these motions brought a quiet steadiness to the room. Water was drawn carefully from the half-frozen well, each bucket lifted with precision to avoid splashes. Walls were inspected, and where frost had loosened the thatch or wattle, they were promptly patched. Firewood was added thoughtfully, log by log, to maintain warmth without letting smoke flood the hut. Outside, seeds were sown along carefully furrowed soil, gently pressed down, a repeated act blending both effort and quiet hope. The day's labor unfolded as a deliberate sequence of connected deeds, each necessary and reassuring in its continuity. These repeated actions grounded the villagers. Their minds followed the steady rhythm of hands and bodies without strain. Whether stirring the stew, lifting water, arranging straw and firewood, or sowing seeds, the repetitive cycle created a hypnotic cadence. Even when tiredness settled deep in their shoulders and hands, their bodies moved in sync with this familiar flow of survival. The quiet motion offered reassurance, a small but vital sense of control over the world within the hut and its immediate surroundings. Together, mind and body relaxed into this rhythm. The villagers' movements intertwined to form a gentle, almost meditative flow. Each action supported the next. Tending animals made water hauling smoother. Water bolstered cooking. Cooking provided warmth. Warmth strengthened hands for sowing seeds. These cycles repeated naturally, softening the senses and easing awareness into the slow and steady passage of the day. As the morning tasks found their steady rhythm, families and neighbors naturally came together to share the work. Tools were gathered and passed around, fires were tended side by side, and small groups merged their labor with quiet conversation. This communal support did more than sustain their physical strength. It bolstered their emotional well-being, weaving the steady beat of survival inside each home into the wider fabric of the village. These connections deepened bonds and centered everyone's focus on familiar, soothing routines. Near the central hearths, families assembled, offering small portions of food and softly exchanging stories of endurance. The air carried the rich aromas of smoked meat, straw, and the gentle warmth of fires that had been burning steadily all day. Children nestled close to elders, their small bodies drawing comfort from the shared presence of neighbors and kin. Every voice was calm, deliberate, and steady, conveying news, caution, or quiet reassurance. From the corners of huts and across yards, soft songs emerged, mingling with the ambient sounds of animals settling in for the night. Laughter rose in brief, gentle bursts, less a sign of exuberance and more an expression of relief, punctuating the peaceful rhythm of communal labor. Small celebrations sparked spontaneously. A loaf of bread that had turned out well, a green sprout appearing in a garden, or a bucket of water safely brought from the thawed stream. Acts of mutual aid unfolded in every gesture, hands passing wood, guiding children, or repairing roofs worn down by winter's harshness. Community was the foundation of survival. These repeated, small acts of cooperation went beyond practicality. They reinforced emotional steadiness, embedding quiet reassurance in each interaction. Every shared meal, song, or simple task formed a web of care, enabling villagers to face the lingering hardships of the season with a steady heart. In the presence of others, the weight of household stress and fatigue grew lighter. The presence of others eased tension. Even as the cold pressed in from outside, warmth flowed through touch, shared effort, and collective focus. Hands briefly met while passing tools. Arms brushed as firewood was stacked. Bodies shifted together near the flames to absorb the heat. Small, comforting reminders that no one faced their struggle alone. As more villagers embraced their daily routines, the environment responded with its first gentle signs of recovery. Delicate green shoots broke through the thawed soil. Birds began to return to the treetops, and soft sunlight sparkled on waters recently freed from ice. The community's steady rhythm and spirit of cooperation drew attention to these subtle changes, reinforcing hope and fostering calm. It was as if their minds and bodies were quietly preparing to follow the slow unfolding emergence of spring. The snow softened beneath the early spring sun. Rivers loosened their icy grasp, and the frozen crust that had hardened the landscape for months gave way to rich, damp mud. The land exhaled in relief, and the village, long burdened by winter's weight, seemed to stretch and breathe anew. Footprints pressed into the thawed earth filled with glistening water, reflecting faint sunlight filtering through the lingering morning mist. Birds returned, their songs light and cautious, weaving through the stillness of the morning. Though muted, the sunlight persisted, touching the frozen remnants and gently warming the first sprouts pushing through softened soil. Tiny seedlings appeared along furrows, signaling hope and continuity after months of stillness. The air carried the subtle scent of wet earth and early blooms, a quiet reassurance that change had begun. This understated renewal underscored a crucial truth. Change itself was the first true victory over winter. The shifting land, the return of sound and movement, reminded villagers that survival had been sustained. Now their bodies and minds could relax into a softer rhythm. Every breath felt lighter, every movement less strained as the environment shifted from holding them tense to gently guiding them back toward life. Bodies and minds breathed easier. Movements that had been guarded grew lighter. Hands that once carefully carried water, lifted firewood, or sowed seeds now moved in a softer, more harmonious rhythm, tuned to the easing landscape. Minds, once tense with constant vigilance, allowed themselves to notice warmth, light, and the gentle pulse of daily life re-emerging. With these first clear signs of recovery taking root, attention naturally turned toward spring tasks. Tools needed preparing, furrows plowed, seeds sown. The village, renewed by subtle shifts in weather and light, summoned the strength and focus required to transition smoothly from enduring winter to the deliberate work of cultivating the land, carrying forward hard-earned lessons of resilience and care. Children began to learn the rhythms of the year not as a rigid list of dates or stiff lessons passed from one person to another, but as a living story shared through the warm heart of the village. From hearth to bench, from field edge to doorway, from elder to child. By the time the thaw had fully settled in, conversations had shifted. The people no longer spoke only of hardship or what had gone wrong. Instead, almost unnoticed, they began to weave the long, dark season into a story that could be told. And that changed the very sound of their evenings. As winter's chill once muted voices with caution, spring breathed life back into them, allowing words to stretch and linger. Children nestled close to their elders, not always still, never wholly patient, yet always listening. One young child idly traced circles in the dirt while an old woman recounted the first week the sun lost its familiar warmth. Another child leaned against a parent's knee as someone else recalled the taste of bark boiled into broth and the eerie silence of birds during that dim year. These stories unfolded slowly, not out of a need to dramatize, but because time itself had softened. There was no longer a rush, and around these tales, hands remained busy. That was part of the comfort too. A basket woven steadily alongside words, a split handle carefully wrapped and bound again, a fishing net stretched across tired knees, mended knot by knot with care. A child quietly sorted beans into a bowl, seeming present even when absorbed. One person shaved a peg for a broken stool, while another recited memories of the week when real shadows first returned to the ground. Memory and labor sat side by side, silently supporting one another, making each bearable. No one named it teaching. Yet, that is precisely what it was. Children learned which mushrooms to avoid, which roots could endure longest kept in cold earth. They discovered how to dry herbs over the hearth in wisps of smoke, how to judge the sky not merely by its light, but by its hues. They learned to save string, to wrap a sore hand, and to read the scent of dawn air. Whether rain would soften the road or render it crueler. They absorbed these lessons in the ancient way, hearing names while witnessing actions. Alongside practical skills came more intangible gifts. Songs flickered into life. Jokes sparked quiet laughter. Fragments of prayer and sayings that had sustained the people during their darkest weeks were shared. Children stumbled through the words at first, then found their rhythm. Melodies that rose by fires one night sang beside streams the next day. Proverbs from one home traveled to another. The village, once joined only by hardship, now began to weave itself together through shared memories. This was recovery's quieter side. Not merely food simmering in pots or fields turning green again, but the reawakening of culture in its smallest forms. A tune made anew, the patience to teach a child, the energy to carve, mend, sort, speak, and remember. Survival had preserved more than flesh. It had preserved ways of speaking, doing, and noticing the world. A child asked why the sky had changed. An old man answered one way. A traveler passing through offered another. Near the doorway, the priest shared a third. Their answers never fully aligned, and rather than causing discord, this gentle disagreement softened the room. The village had learned to dwell with uncertainty. More important than answers was the act of holding the question together, speaking it aloud, turning it over as one. Curiosity itself was slowly becoming safe again. Around this newfound openness, small communal projects blossomed, gathering strength from the shared feeling of wonder and connection. In the village, small changes began to appear, not because things were falling apart, but because now there was time to care. A fence was fixed, not out of urgent need, but simply because it could be. A bench was built outside the chapel wall, where none had stood before. Roofs, once patched hastily, were mended with care. Inside one hut, a little shelf was added to keep seed pouches dry, and a corner was cleared for children to scratch letters or marks in the dirt as they listened to stories. None of these acts were grand or extraordinary, and that was precisely why they mattered. Life had moved beyond mere reactions. It was beginning to organize itself with purpose and intention. Storytelling became a source of calm, a gentle rhythm to life. A voice would rise above the quiet. Hands would continue weaving cloth or baskets. Laughter would softly bubble up. A child would ask a question. Pots would be shifted closer to the fire. A song would begin from memory, picked up line by someone else. The mind found rest within this pattern. No solving, no proving needed immediately. The village was doing what villages have always done once the worst of hardship passes, turning ordeal into shared language. And in that shared language lay a quiet but powerful strength. Survival wasn't just about having firewood, grain, or patched roofs. It was equally about memory, imitation, customs, and stories. People endured because they knew what to do, yes, but also because they knew how to tell each other what had been done before and kept telling it again and again until knowledge felt as warm and reassuring as a fire's glow. The children would carry these lessons forward. Not just the facts of that hard year, but the habits it forged. How one saved crumbs. How one watched the sky. How one listened for creaks in a roof beam or noticed steam rising from damp clothes near the hearth. How one shared what little there was. How one joked when laughter was scarce. The harsh season was becoming something repeatable, something survivable. Not just in reality, but in memory, too. Because now, story and work moved together so naturally. The village evenings were quiet in a new way. Not with the hush of fear, not the silence hunger once brought, but a gentler hush, one made of tired voices, steady hands, and the slow comfort of traditions passed on. From this place, the mind could finally relax, following the people from memory into rest, from shared endurance into the soft, final quiet of night. Night came differently now. Gone was the heavy dread that once pressed down like a gray, breathless weight over every roof and field, threatening to flatten the world. This darkness was kinder. It arrived with weariness, with evening smoke curling in the air, with the gentle dimming of a day honestly lived. The fire was lit before it was asked for twice. The room gathered around it slowly, without hurry. Cloaks were folded by the walls, bowls set down, empty, but clean. Children moved toward the warmth naturally, no call needed. Outside, the air cooled. Inside, the household leaned inward. Not in fear anymore, but in quiet habit and relief. The fire remained the same, yet it was also different. It's still just fire. Wood crackling, embers glowing, flames flickering, and smoke curling upward into the rafters where it has always drifted. Yet memory reshapes this scene. What once was a defense, a vigil held with anxious eyes through the longest, coldest hours, weighed against the sting of frost with desperate calculations, has become warmth again. Not in excess, not in comfort, but simply warmth allowed to exist freely. The room receives it anew. Hands reach toward it without the quick retreat of fear. Shoulders drop. Faces relax. The gentle sounds of evening softly return. The creak of settling straw, the clink of a spoon turning in a bowl, murmured voices spoken only because silence no longer demands such fierce guarding. Families draw near the hearth. This remains the truest shape of evening, perhaps forever. First, the children arrive, still bearing the last traces of the day on their sleeves. Mud, straw, a hint of dust, the fresh scent of grass from running outside. Then the older children join them, followed by adults, all bringing remnants of their day's labor, earth beneath fingernails, smoke scenting their clothes, the ache in their backs, the satisfying weight of work completed. Even the animals settle, no longer symbols of shared struggle, but simply creatures returning to their cozy corners and warmth. The room fills, slowly and naturally, as though every corner of the house understands the meaning of evening, because this room has learned to carry memory without breaking beneath its weight. Small moments begin to glow. The first bread that tasted like celebration. No more hard, crumbly crusts from the toughest weeks. No. Longer meager scraps divided in silence, but the first warm, fragrant loaf that paused the room. When it was broken apart, the aroma rising, steam billowing from the torn center. The way everyone ate more slowly, hesitant to believe such goodness had truly returned. The first laughter while chewing, not from hunger or nerves, but from the strange sweetness of finally tasting enough. The first true sun, not a pale gray or a thin veil across the sky, but genuine light strong enough to cast shadows, strong enough to make someone in the yard halt in amazement at the dark shapes on the ground. Light that gilded faces with gold on one side, reviving that old certainty deep in the body. Morning and light always belong together. Even now, within the quiet glow of the firelit room, the memory of that sunlight drapes the household like a gentle blanket. The first flower, so small it might have been missed in another year. A single bloom in thawed earth, no bigger than a thumb joint, opening where no one expected life to stir. Yet after such a harsh season, smallness only magnifies its beauty. One flower was enough to summon silence around it, a reminder that color hadn't vanished but merely hid. Enough to make hope feel less like burden and more like something that might genuinely take root on its own. And the first easy breath, that moment held significance beyond the mere essentials, more vital than bread, the sun, or even the resilience of a flower, because the body recognizes truth long before the mind can accept it. There came a day when breathing no longer felt like a tense struggle, when each inhale no longer invited cold into the chest. The approach of night meant no more bracing for loss. This invisible victory goes unannounced, but it is sensed deeply in relaxed shoulders, in peaceful sleep, in a jaw unclenched, in a hand that rests open rather than balled tight. So now, the passing season starts to live within memory, through sensations, not through dates. Hands cracked and worn, wrapped around a warming bowl, smoke lingering thickly in the timbers above. The pig's heavy heat providing comfort by the fire during the darkest weeks. Frozen mornings, when the world itself seemed to have forgotten how to move. The first bird call breaking through long silence. The first shoots of green pushing through frozen earth. The first evening when the roof no longer dripped cold onto bedding. And the first gentle utterance of tomorrow by someone who truly meant it. All of this remains etched in the body, not exactly as scars, but as patterns once endured and now deeply understood. The true triumph was never a grand spectacle. No one stood atop a hill proclaiming victory. No flags were raised, no chronicler recorded names in bold ink to honor the brave. Instead, it was smaller, more profound, living in everyday acts repeated until they drew the line between survival and loss. It was visible in hands that kept lifting, stirring, patching, and tending. In food quietly shared, in stories told to push back endless darkness, in neighbors who chose generosity when winter made selfishness untenable. This is the essence of humanity. Not heroic grandeur, but endurance without an audience. A courage rooted in the domestic. Patient strength so steady it barely looked like courage as it unfolded. Bodies bent, wills wore thin. Hope had to be carried in the smallest pieces. Yet still, people rose, stirred, sewed, mended, and carried each other further into the year than fear deemed possible. You bent, nearly broke, yet somehow held on. There is a gentleness acknowledging all this now, not as loud praise, not as triumph shouted into the darkness, but as quiet recognition. The hearth stayed warm. The village endured. Children grew. Tools wore down only to be lifted again. The fields responded to the hands that worked them. The fire held steady. The sky returned. Even grief, where it had settled, now sat quietly among the living, folded into the greater truth that life moved on around and through it. The night room seems to hold all this wisdom. The fire softens into a glowing red heart. A blanket is gently pulled over a sleeping child. A bowl is rinsed and carefully turned upside down. A stool scrapes once lightly on the floor, then falls silent. The air greets you differently in this space, cool by the door, cozy near the hearth, and comfortably kind everywhere in between. Those walls that once seemed barely enough to shield from the outside world now feel sufficient. Not flawless, not grandiose, but sufficient. And after enduring such a harsh season, sufficiency feels nearly like peace. Breathing slows. The body relaxes. The hand resting on the knee softens. The jaw unclenches. The eyes cease their endless watch over the door, the ceiling, the fire, or the weather. They begin to close naturally. Tonight, no one needs to earn sleep through weary vigilance. Rest arrives pure and unburdened, not because the world has transformed into a place without threat, but because the season demanding relentless alertness has finally passed. The mind still carries echoes of caution. The body clings to old patterns. But beneath those memories, beneath the lingering thrift of winter, something far greater returns. Safety enough. And that is the true essence sleep requires. Not certainty, not plenty, simply enough warmth, enough nourishment, enough quiet, enough closeness, enough darkness gently held at bay so that the body dares to drift downward without fearing what the morning will bring. So the story doesn't have to shut like a door. It can stay ajar, like a room where the fire has been slow banked for the night, with everyone trusting it to burn till dawn. Outside, the fields rest under starlight, clouds, or whatever sky this new season offers. Inside, the people who have weathered that bleak year and its long shadow find comfort in air. the slow, hard-won peace that follows survival. The fire burns lower. The room settles into its quiet. Memory melts into warmth. Warmth softens into drowsiness. And from this gentle place, without forcing an end, the mind simply follows the soft red glow of the hearth as it fades into sleep.